Revenge with Karen.
The applause sounded like rain on a tin roof, loud, meaningless, and impossible to stop. I stood there under the lights, staring down at the plaque in my hands. Happy Retirement, Dorothy McMillan. It read in bold gold lettering, as if I'd been informed in advance that my career was over. I hadn't. 10 minutes prior, I was backstage reviewing final performance logs for the product I spent 12 years birthing into existence. And now, here I was, eulogized like a dead goldfish in front of investors, media, and half the tech press. Let's give a huge round of applause. The CEO beamed, gripping the mic like he'd just reinvented the wheel. And a special thank you to the visionary who brought this idea to market, our very own head of strategic launch, Brian Caslow. Brian Caslow, his son-in-law, 6 months in. The guy still didn't know what half the acronyms on our dashboards meant. Man once asked me if the term back-end latency had something to do with hemorrhoids. And yet here he was, now the visionary. I mustered a tight-lipped smile and gave a single nod, the kind you make when you've bitten your tongue so hard you can taste blood. You'd think after 12 years of 14-hour days, launch delays, budget tug-of-wars, and babysitting a revolving door of interns turned executives, I'd earn more than a farewell plaque that looked like it had been ordered off Etsy 2 hours ago. I could feel the photographers zooming in. Somewhere out there, an investor was live tweeting my betrayal in real time. Oh, and if you're still here with me, pause for a second. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been thanked for your service by someone who wouldn't last a Tuesday doing your job, hit that like button and consider subscribing. Seriously, 95% of you forget. It keeps the lights on for our team and this story. It's just getting started. Back on stage, the CEO gestured to the oversized touchscreen display behind him, which now looped a promo video featuring Brian doing a dramatic voiceover, like he was narrating a trailer for a Marvel movie. I had written every line of code, built the API layer from scratch, pulled all-nighters with bloodshot eyes, and a bottle of ibuprofen the size of a baseball. Meanwhile, Brian once printed out a GitHub repo like it was an IKEA manual and asked if I could walk him through the furniture. The crowd clapped politely. No one knew the train wreck waiting under the hood, the bugs I patched without credit, the compliance reports I had to rewrite because someone kept uploading the wrong datasets, or the fact that Brian's innovation was literally a redesign I shelved 2 years ago because it caused a 7% crash rate on older devices. Sure, let the man-child take a bow. I stepped off stage as the lights dimmed for the demo segment, fingers still curled around the edge of the plaque. I didn't storm off. No tears. Just the slow walk of someone who'd memorized every hallway in that building, every quiet corridor where I'd once fixed emergencies on Christmas Eve or coached an intern through their first code merge at midnight. The crowd kept clapping. I kept walking. First board member I passed looked up from her phone. "Dorothy?" she whispered, startled. I didn't stop. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome counting down. One last sprint, straight to the boardroom, where a certain clause on a certain term sheet had been collecting dust for 2 years, just waiting for a moment like this. And oh, was it ready to breathe. The plaque was still in my hand when I walked into the boardroom, though I'd started gripping it like a weapon. If it had sharper edges, it would have drawn blood. The room was empty, polished, unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that makes you notice the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of overpaid carpet. On the long mahogany table, 12 chairs sat neatly pushed in, like they were waiting for someone brave enough to make a mess. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. I opened my bag, pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying for exactly 6 weeks, signed, dated, notarized, my resignation letter. Not a dramatic one. No accusations, no self-pity. Just, effective immediately, I resign my position as Chief Product Officer and withdraw as the named Compliance Officer per Clause 7B of the investor term sheet. That clause, the one the CEO never read, or read and forgot because legalese gives him hives, wasn't window dressing. It wasn't symbolic. It was the fuse. Clause 7B. In the event that the named Officer of Record for Compliance and Technical Oversight resigns or is removed, funding and product release are automatically paused pending review and reappointment. My name was printed in bold on that document. Black ink on white paper. Dorothy McMillan, not a team, not a role, a person. I left the envelope on the table, right where the chair would sit, slid it forward like a queen laying down the final piece on a chessboard, and stepping away before the other player realizes they're already checkmated. The air in the room felt cooler when I left, like the HVAC knew a storm was coming. Outside the boardroom, the hallway pulsed with celebration. Distant cheers, music thumping like a graduation party for someone who cheated on their final and still got valedictorian. I heard the MC's voice echoing from the main stage. And now, to walk us through our revolutionary tech demo, please welcome Brian Caslow. Of course. Let the laminated clipboard prince show off what he barely understands. I made my way to the back of the event hall and stood by the exit, out of the light, invisible to the crowd. I could see Brian fumbling with the tablet on stage, clearly out of sync with the slides. Launch screens weren't even aligned correctly on the backdrop. The interface was sluggish. He tapped twice, then 3 times, the kind of panic tapping you do when your DoorDash app freezes and you're hangry. Up in the VIP section, the CEO clinked glasses with the CFO and leaned back like a smug man watching his legacy unfold. I almost admired the delusion. Almost. I crossed my arms and waited, not out of spite, not out of revenge, just timing, because the chair of the board would be returning from the restroom any minute. And on that table, in that silent room, was a resignation letter that detonated the one clause the CEO never thought I'd have the gall or foresight to pull. But I wasn't emotional. I was precise. They'd handed me a plaque. I handed them a countdown. And this time, the cameras wouldn't be ready. The champagne had already been popped by the time I made it back to the edge of the ballroom, just far enough from the stage to be unseen, just close enough to hear the cracks forming beneath the glitter. The CEO, Lawrence J. Kane Roman III, though he always insisted people just call him Larry, raised his glass like he was proposing to a nation. To legacy, he boomed, voice drenched in self-congratulation. To innovation. And to Brian Caslow, our next generation leader. The crowd clapped again, though this time it was thinner. Confused, few folks looked at each other, as if silently asking, wait, wasn't this Dorothy's baby? But Brian soaked it up anyway. He stood center stage with his arms open like he was waiting for a spotlight that never came. His suit was just a little too big, his tie already crooked from the demo flub earlier, and his cheeks glistened with the overzealous confidence of a man who thinks charisma is the same thing as competence. Thank you, everyone, Brian said into the mic, his voice cracking ever so slightly. We are thrilled to usher in a new era of performance, scalability, and seamless user empowerment. I nearly choked on my own breath. User empowerment. That phrase alone told me he'd skimmed the pitch deck and memorized whatever buzzword salad he thought sounded most impressive. The back end was held together with duct tape and prayers. The current build was flagged in staging for failing 4 compliance checks, 3 of which I fixed without credit, and 1 of which still lingered because Brian insisted it wasn't a big deal. Backstage, the CFO, Mark, had just returned from making calls. I caught a glimpse of him through the curtain, whispering something in Larry's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the face, concern, worry, even a flicker of sweat. Mark looked like a man who just realized the safe wasn't locked. Larry waved him off with a chuckle. She was stepping down anyway, I imagined him saying. Just moved the timeline up. He probably thought that was true. He'd always believed my title was ceremonial, a nod to loyalty. Like I was an old dog you keep around out of respect, not realizing that dog knows where the blueprints are buried. He assumed I'd fade out quietly, maybe send a thank you email, and ride off into early retirement. He didn't know about Clause 7B, didn't remember the term sheet we negotiated back when the investors weren't just VC firms, but friends of friends who trusted me with the technical guts of the company. He didn't realize that my resignation was already time-stamped, logged, and sent through the appropriate legal pipeline to activate a review freeze. He didn't notice the room start to shift. A few board members were checking their phones now. One of the junior execs walked out with a laptop half open, whispering into her AirPods like something urgent had just come in. The event photographer paused near the back, lowering his camera to glance toward me for a beat, recognition flickering behind his eyes. I didn't move. I watched the orchestra of ignorance unfold in real time. Larry passing around flutes of champagne like confetti, Brian posing with product engineers he didn't know the names of, and Mark pacing again, this time faster, his hand to his mouth. We're celebrating in a minefield, dancing in loafers over paperwork they never bothered to read. And I just stood there, arms crossed, not smiling, not fuming, just waiting, because the chair would have opened that envelope by now. And the dominoes were already tilting. The ballroom doors hissed open like an airlock, and in walked the man whose signature outweighed everyone else's applause combined, Gunnar Halvorsen, lead investor and kingmaker in a navy cashmere overcoat that somehow looked both casual and lethal. His presence hit the room like a dropped scalpel. Clean, sharp, quietly dangerous. He didn't do the glad-handing thing. He didn't need to. One glance from Halvorsen could drop a valuation by 8 figures. People just cleared space, like well-trained electrons orbiting a very rich, very bored nucleus. Larry was on him like a moth to a flame, lighting down from the VIP section with that toothy CEO grin reserved for billionaires and yacht owners. "Gunnar, so glad you could make it," he said, arms open, dripping with affected warmth. "You're just in time. We're showcasing the next-gen roadmap tonight. Brian's killing it on stage, as you can see." Halvorsen's eyes flicked past him to the projection screen where Brian was mid-gesture, clicking through a slide titled Platform Resilience and Edge Strategy. A deck I built, a title he didn't understand. "Brian," Halvorsen repeated, voice flat. Larry nodded like a dad bragging about his kid's first job, really proud of him. He's been leading the charge. Fresh direction, new blood. You know how it is, can't keep leaning on the same legacy structures forever, right? That line hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast. Halvorsen's brow dipped, not enough to be called a scowl, but enough to register in the bones. He turned and scanned the room. Crowd, the board members whispering in the corner, the CTO fumbling with a lapel mic, the tablet on stage glitching slightly in Brian's sweaty hands. Then his gaze found me. I didn't wave, didn't nod, just stood there, still clutching the plaque like a forgotten Christmas ornament. Halvorsen tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they walk into a kitchen and realize the stove is on, but no one's cooking. "Where's Dorothy?" he asked. Larry chuckled, forced and nasal. "Oh, you know Dorothy. Always heads down, doesn't like the limelight." That was a lie, of course. I'd spent the last decade speaking on panels, sitting on advisory boards, and negotiating contracts with security firms in 4 time zones. I was never heads down. I was keystone in the arch essential. Wasn't she listed on the term sheet as oversight officer? Halvorsen added, voice slow, deliberate. Larry waved a hand like he was swatting away a gnat. "Technically, sure, but that's more of a historical nod. She's easing into retirement. Just a timing thing. We've got new people stepping in." Halvorsen's jaw didn't move, but something behind his eyes did, like a filing cabinet opening in his brain. I could almost hear the rustle of the clause being recalled, Clause 7B, to be specific. My clause. A board member approached then, whispering into Larry's ear. I saw Larry's smile falter, grip on the champagne flute stiffen just slightly. Halvorsen caught it too. He turned back to the stage, where Brian was now bumbling his way through a cue and a segment, mispronouncing one of the back-end protocols, and getting visibly annoyed with a question he didn't understand. I saw a few engineers in the front row exchanging looks. One actually winced. Halvorsen didn't say anything for a long beat. Then finally, "I'll want to speak with Dorothy before the night is not a request, a fact." Larry laughed again, this one even thinner than the last. "Of course, she's probably around here somewhere." She was just a few yards away, watching the whole house of cards start to sway. And for the first time that night, I felt something warm move beneath the cold. Not joy, not vengeance. Just the sweet, quiet pressure of vindication rising like a slow tide. And it was only ankle deep. The chair found the envelope exactly where I left it, centered, clean, impossible to ignore. By the time she slid it open with the corner of her badge, the air in the boardroom had already begun to shift. That's the thing about paper, isn't it? It doesn't shout, it whispers. But the right words on the right page can detonate louder than a fire alarm. She read the resignation once, then again. Her eyes widened, not with drama, but with the dawning awareness that something foundational had just cracked. Kind of shift you don't feel until the floor under your feet gives a little pop and reminds you it was never solid to begin with. She didn't say a word to the others. Just tucked the envelope back inside, walked out of the boardroom, and made a direct line across the event floor, past interns taking selfies, past execs slapping backs, past a marketing VP in a sequin jacket asking for a drink ticket. He climbed the 3 steps up to the VIP platform and leaned in toward Halvorsen like a whisper could stop time. I couldn't hear what she said, but I didn't have to, because Halvorsen's face drained faster than the champagne flute in his hand. His expression didn't twist or frown. It hardened, like concrete setting under heat. His gaze lowered to the folder she handed him, thick, off-white, marked with the legal stamp we used for anything tied to the Series C term sheet. Opened it with the calm of someone who already knew there was a gun inside, but wanted to check which way it was pointed. Clause 7B was in the second section, Compliance and Oversight Provisions. It wasn't buried, but it wasn't flashy. Just a neat, sterile sentence with fatal impact. In the event the named compliance officer of record, currently Dorothy McMillan, should resign or be removed, funding disbursement and product launch approval shall be suspended pending formal reappointment and review. There it was. Not metaphor, not sentiment, just structure. Legal cement poured with my name still wet in the middle. Haverson stared at it for a long moment. His lips didn't move. His fingers rested against the paper like it might burn if he squeezed too hard. The chair spoke again, this time just 3 words. I read them from her lips. She already resigned. There was a moment, half a breath, where nothing happened. The music played on. Larry was still laughing somewhere. Brian, on stage, was attempting a half-baked metaphor about redefining edge architecture using an anecdote about his college Wi-Fi. The crowd clapped politely. Nothing out of place. Nothing visibly wrong. But if you looked closer, you'd notice the delay, the ripple. Haverson's foot tapping now. The chair texting legal, or its general counsel being flagged down by a junior associate with panic in his eyes. A software engineer slipping out of the ballroom with his badge half-swiped and a laptop clutched to his chest. Brian didn't notice any of it. Larry didn't see the center of the web shaking, but I did, because I had written the architecture for this company's actual foundation, not the code, but the clause. I knew where the supports were, and I knew exactly what happened when one was pulled. Haverson folded the term sheet and slid it back into the folder with mechanical calm. Then he stood, slow, deliberate. Every eye in the VIP section turned toward him, a current of tension following in his wake like gravity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "This changes things." Then he stepped off the platform and walked toward the stage. The crowd still clapped. The music still played, but the fuse had already reached the charge. The explosion was a matter of seconds. Larry finally got the news 5 minutes too late and 10 years too cocky. A junior board liaison, face pale, tie askew, intercepted him near the dessert table, whispering something urgent in his ear, while Larry scooped another dollop of creme brulee into his martini glass like a toddler discovering sugar. I watched from the back as the whisper landed, and Larry's brow twitched just once before he waved it away like a fly. "She what?" he said, louder than necessary. "Dorothy, that's not a problem. She was retiring anyway. We'll update the filings next quarter." He even chuckled. Next quarter. As if the term sheet was a birthday card you could toss on the pile and maybe circle back to between golf trips. As if the investor standing 15 feet away hadn't just reread Clause 7B like it was a court summons written in his own blood. Haverson had paused in the aisle, still standing, still silent, the kind of silence that comes with wealth that no longer has to speak first. "Let's circle up after the event," Larry added, smiling too wide, sweat now visibly pooling at his hairline. "I've got some fantastic projections I'd love to share with you one-on-one." Haverson didn't move. "I'd like a word now." Larry gave a sharp exhale. "Totally get it. Look, let me just close this out. 2 more segments. Brian's got the tech demo. Then we'll cut the launch ribbon. Big press moment. We'll get drinks right after." The man just tried to schedule a drink with the angel of death. Haverson looked past him toward the stage, where Brian was being wired up by the A/V team, fiddling with his shirt cuffs like he was about to give a TED talk instead of present a product he couldn't spell, much less explain. Behind him, the UI splash screen flickered, Dorothy's design, across a massive LED wall. I'd watched that interface evolve for 6 years, patch by patch, flowchart by flowchart. Every pixel was mine, every backend hook, every protocol, every kill switch. And there was Brian squinting at the prompter like he was trying to read a ransom note. Haverson didn't say another word to Larry. He just stepped back into the shadows, folding his arms. Not leaving, not interrupting, just watching, like a sniper with perfect patience. Backstage, the event manager gave the nod to the lighting crew. Brian adjusted his headset mic and cleared his throat twice. The crowd was still oblivious, buzzing, swaying, the kind of energy you feel at concerts right before the headliner comes on, except the headliner had no idea what chords he was about to play. And I just let it happen. I didn't run up to stop the show. I didn't yell from the back row. That's not how this kind of reckoning works. You don't pull the fire alarm. You let them strike the match in a fireworks factory they don't even realize is full of gas leaks and loose wires. The resistance was always going to come, not from me, but from the system they ignored, the terms they skimmed, the trust they assumed. Larry thought power meant microphones and champagne flutes and stage lights. I knew better. Ill power is letting the man who stole your voice hand himself the grenade, and just watching. Brian stepped to center stage. The lights went down, a hush fell, and Halvorson narrowed his eyes. The reckoning wasn't coming, it was already here. Brian had just launched into his third vision statement when Halvorson moved. No announcement. No dramatic music cue. Just the sound of expensive shoes against the stage steps, one deliberate thud after another, sliced through the ballroom hum like a paper cutter through silk. The room didn't notice at first, not really. Not until Halvorson stepped into the spotlight like he owned it. Because he did. Brian didn't see him, not at first. He was too busy fumbling through a metaphor about leveraging user-centric dynamics across the cloud, while stabbing at a tablet that refused to sync with the demo server. Another landmine I'd predicted, and they'd ignored. That's why today's product launch represents a turning point in Scalable in No. The mic was gone. Just plucked from his hand mid-sentence. Brian blinked like a toddler whose pacifier had been swiped. He turned and saw Gunnar Halvorson standing next to him, face expressionless, hand gripping the mic like it was a gavel. The house lights didn't shift. No cue was given, but the room froze anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," Halvorson said, voice low but surgical, "this launch is suspended." The word suspended detonated like a flare gun over a wedding. He let the silence breathe, not awkwardly, purposefully, like a surgeon pausing before the first incision. Then, effective immediately, per our term sheet, Clause 7b, no funding or go-to-market activity may proceed without active oversight by the named compliance officer of record. Murmurs flared, heads turned, cameras repositioned. Someone from the press section dropped a notepad. Halvorson slowly turned to the audience. Then his gaze swept to the back row and landed squarely on me. "Dorothy McMillan," he said, not loudly, but like a sentence being underlined in red, "is the named officer." You could feel the panic bloom across the floor, not the loud kind yet, but the silent realization that all those press kits, launch tweets, marketing spend, scheduled interviews, were now radioactive. The CFO's mouth fell open. The CTO stood, sat, then stood again. PR reps checked their phones like maybe the news would unhappen if they didn't see it. Larry had gone sheet white in the VIP section, lips twitching like he was deciding whether to sprint or faint. And Brian, he looked directly at me. His face collapsed in real time. Because for the first time in his overpromoted, underqualified life, he realized the cameras had turned. Not toward him, but toward the woman in the back row. Me. Flashes found my face. Journalists whispered to each other. One of the board members reached for her phone like she needed to verify my name wasn't some fever dream. I didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked calmly back at Halvorson and gave him the smallest nod. It was all I needed to do. He nodded once in return. Then stepped off stage, mic still in hand, leaving Brian standing there like someone had cut the strings on a department store mannequin. Silence clung to the walls. The product banner rippled slightly from the A/C. And the launch, 12 years in the making, hung in the air like a party balloon stabbed mid-float. They thought the evening belonged to them. Turns out, the claws belonged to me. Backstage collapsed like a folding table in a thunderstorm. The CEO, Larry, red-faced and suddenly drenched in flop sweat, stormed past the lighting rig barking at anyone holding a clipboard. "We need to fix this. Halvorson back. Tell him we'll refile the officer forms by Monday. Hell, tonight, I'll call legal myself. Just where's Brian?" Brian was slumped in a chair by the water cooler, headset askew, staring into the middle distance like someone who'd just learned gravity was optional and he'd been floating on borrowed air. A junior producer tried to restart the demo loop, but the feed was already cut. Event tech stood frozen, waiting for instructions no one was brave enough to give. The screens behind the stage had gone dark. The launch graphics were gone. The product banners looked like bad jokes now, oversized foam monuments to a party that had ended mid-toast. Legal finally arrived, glasses fogged, shoes squeaking, and cornered Larry near the loading dock. They held up the term sheet with both hands like a sacred scroll. "It's binding," the lawyer said, breathless. "Clause 7b is not discretionary. Her resignation automatically suspends all deliverables tied to funding triggers." Larry waved the paper away. "Then we reappoint her. Temporarily, ceremonially. I'll issue a letter of reinstatement myself." "You can't," legal replied flatly. "Reappointment must be approved by the board and by her." Larry blinked. "She'll do it. She doesn't want the whole thing to crash. Legal didn't respond. Because right then, across 3 Slack channels and 2 group emails, the first batch of evidence surfaced. One engineer forwarded a flagged bug report dated 3 weeks prior, an authentication vulnerability with live user data exposure. Severity, critical. I'd tagged it for executive review. Attached were screenshots of Brian's response. Reviewed, not urgent. Let's not slow down the rollout. Another thread emerged, emails I'd sent directly to the compliance team, warning about a faulty integration on the analytics side that could compromise session data. Again, buried, deferred. Brian had replied, let's not flood the pipeline with low-priority noise. We need a clean story for investors. Except now the story wasn't clean, it was radioactive. By the time Haverson returned backstage, Larry had 3 people on speakerphone and 1 foot out the metaphorical window. But Haverson didn't want spin, didn't want handshakes or promises or we'll do better next time. He wanted accountability. You tried to erase the person this product depends on, Haverson said, quiet and flat. And you did it live in front of every stakeholder we have. It was a celebration, Larry snapped, losing the last of his polish. A handoff, a gesture. I never meant to offend Dorothy. She could have told me if there was an issue. She did, Haverson replied. Multiple times. In writing. She ignored. Larry opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. Across the hall, more board members had joined a private thread. Someone posted a side-by-side comparison of my original compliance checklist and Brian's edited launch deck. Key safeguards had been stripped. Several data validation protocols were just gone. The final blow came from our third-party vendor, the one that handled beta deployments. A regional manager flagged a report showing error spikes that matched the exact scenarios I'd flagged in staging, but Brian had deemed non-critical. The vendor quietly suspended our rollout until further review. No approval, no compliance, no launch. I stood just outside the curtain, arms folded, listening to the tower fall. I didn't gloat. I didn't enjoy the sound of Larry's voice rising in desperation, or the sight of Brian being led gently toward an exit by someone from PR who kept saying, "We just need a moment, that's all, just take a breath." What I felt wasn't triumph. It was weight. Cold, solid, justified weight. The kind that lands not with a roar, but with the gravity of inevitability. I didn't want this. I built this company to stand, not fall. But they insisted on climbing its bones like scaffolding, wondered why the whole thing cracked when they yanked the Keystone out for a photo op. The show was over. But the reckoning had one more act. The boardroom smelled like expensive panic. The chandelier flickered overhead like it, too, wasn't sure who was in charge anymore. The same chairs that once cushioned a dozen spineless nods were now filled with stone-faced silence. Phones on silent. Laptops closed. Every eye on Haverson, who stood at the head of the table like a man reading last rites to the old order. I didn't speak first. I didn't need to. "Here's the offer," he said, voice calm, not cold. Funding reinstated, full project revival, provided oversight returns to the original officer of record. He turned his gaze to me, Dorothy McMillan. The words hit the table like a signature on a will. No one moved. Larry finally cleared his throat, desperate to inject authority back into the room. Let's not rush this. There are transitional implications. Brand perception, leadership cohesion. Haverson turned to him. You publicly announced her retirement without her consent, credited her work to a relative with zero domain expertise, ignored her compliance flags, then lied to me onstage. Larry opened his mouth again. Haverson raised a single hand. If you speak again before this vote, I walk. Funding goes with me. Larry sat. A few board members exchanged glances. One tapped her pen twice, a nervous tick I'd seen during high-stakes decisions before. Another scrolled briefly through his tablet, no doubt rereading every clause we'd just triggered like a checklist of professional self-immolation. Then came the vote. 8 in favor, 2 abstained. Larry didn't vote at all. He just stared at the table like he was trying to memorize the grain pattern for his memoir. I signed the reinstatement form in front of them all. No fanfare, just ink and breath. Haverson gave a slight nod. You'll report directly to the board. Full operational control. No intermediaries. I stood, tucked the signed document into my folder, and thanked no one. There were no handshakes, no applause. Only consequences, finally folding into place. I walked out of the boardroom and back through the service corridor, past the echoing silence where backstage chaos had lived just hours ago. The event hall was nearly empty now, half lit, camera rigs half dismantled. A few vendors packed away unclaimed swag bags. The spotlight rig flickered onstage, unattended, still angled toward a mic no one dared to touch since Halvorsen dropped his line like a guillotine. I stepped onto the stage, not to relaunch, not to perform. To stop it, I found the main camera switchboard by the front row. The tech, startled, moved aside. I flipped the master feed toggle off. No live stream, no footage, no spin, just silence. Then I reached into my tote bag, the plaque still in its crinkled tissue paper, the one they handed me like a tombstone for my usefulness. I held it in both hands for a moment, then placed one palm against the edge and snapped it in half. The sound was small but final, like a whisper saying never again. I walked to the nearest trash can and dropped it in without a word. Then I walked to my new office. It used to be Larry's. Now it was mine, no speech, no vengeance monologue, just a reclaimed chair, a clear desk, and a digital dashboard where the company's future now reported to me. Not because I demanded it, but because I was named. And finally, I would not be forgotten. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.